everyone. My name is Devyani Khare, and I'm joined by Aya Antonio, my colleague. We're both regional communications officers at Break Free from Plastic. We will be recording this meeting, which will be available on YouTube after, and we will also circulate a press release, which will have additional links for all relevant materials we'll share here today. So today's media briefing hopes to prepare journalists for the upcoming round of negotiations. That is the second meeting of the fifth session of UNEP's INC to develop an international legally binding instrument on plastic pollution. It's happening from August 5th to 14th in Geneva, Switzerland. Throughout the INCs, we've drawn attention to one key consideration. Plastic pollutes at every stage of its life cycle, from extraction to production, sale, consumption, all the way to disposal. So if we want a treaty that is effective, we need to address upstream, midstream, and downstream levels. You'll hear more about this during the briefing. Those of you who have covered the negotiations so far would remember just how long it's taken us to get to this point. This is a rough timeline of how we got here and where we're heading next. So far, after all of these years, the plastic pollution crisis has only gotten more critical, and the solutions sound more hollow and ineffective. This is why it is imperative we have a strong, effective treaty. I'm joined today by policy research experts from across Asia Pacific to help us understand where we stand today and to urge you as the media to push for a strong, effective treaty. First up, I'd like to invite Semi from Break Free from Plastic. She's our global policy advisor who has been closely following the negotiations. Semi will provide a quick recap of the negotiations so far, and more importantly, what to expect at INC 5.2. Over to you, Semi.
Thank you, Dee. If I could maybe advance to the next slide, please. Hi, everyone. As Dee introduced me, my name is Semi, and it's a pleasure to be with you today. Next slide, please. So as Dee mentioned, I'll be covering the topics that you all could expect to be covered during INC 5.2. As you all know, this is a resumed fifth session of the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee. The first session happened last year in December. It ended in December of last year in Busan, South Korea. And then that technically didn't conclude the meeting. It actually just adjourned to be resumed later this year, which will be August 5th. So the tentative schedule that has been set out by the chair in this document called the scenario note, as you can see is linked to this slide as well, is as follows. On August 5th, there'll be an opening plenary with an opportunity for observers, which would include civil society, but also other stakeholders such as industry or other international bodies, to have an opportunity to present their statements. And then starting August 6th, or depending on the day, on August 5th, it could happen as well. These things called contact groups will most likely be happening. This is not open to press, unfortunately. However, depending on who you could talk to, maybe in the corridors of Geneva, you'll most likely be able to, get a sense of like how the conversations are going. And then come August 9th, there's going to be a stock-taking plenary. This is kind of where the chair basically convenes everyone back to a plenary setting for all of us to kind of figure out where we are, how negotiations have been going so far, and what next steps we should work. So, format could be revisited, maybe kind of topics that we need to be discussed will then get reassessed. During stock-taking plenaries, there's usually no opportunity for observers to make their intervention. However, because this is a plenary setting, it will be open for press. And then August 10th, according to the chair's scenario note, this is an official day that the chair has reserved for informals. So it won't be open to media or for observers. The purpose of informals are usually so that country delegates can get together in a setting where they could talk a little bit more in private to help make it a more conducive environment for frank and candid conversations. And then for August 12th through 13th, this is a little bit of a newer kind of, I guess, segment to previous INCs. There will be a ministerial gathering. According to the executive director of UNEP, this will look like more of like a round table setting. So far, according to rumors, there have been about 70 ministers that have registered to attend INC 5.2. We'll only be able to find out once we're actually in Geneva to see if that's going to really be the case. But I think that's a good indication that there are many ministers from many countries that are just as eager to see INC 5.2 conclude in Geneva. And then, of course, there's going to be a final plenary on August 14th. Depending on the time that the final plenary starts, it may flow over to the next wee hours of the morning of August 15th. And again, because it's a plenary format, it'll be open to media. And depending on, I guess, the situation, the final plenary may also be a place for observers, including civil society, to make statements as well. Next slide, please. So then what will be negotiated? As I said before, this is going to be a continuation of the negotiations that happened in Busan. And so for the upcoming round of negotiations, countries will continue to use the chair's latest text that was actually provided on towards like the last days of INC 5 in Busan on December 1st. The chair provided this sort of kind of truncated, yet somehow comprehensive in a little ways, because it does include a lot of different options and positions of different countries. It's a text that is made so that it will be more facilitative towards countries being able to negotiate. So this document will be the basis of the negotiations. And as you can see on the slide, the entire text is still up to, it's still going to be negotiated, which basically means that nothing is agreed at this juncture. So with that being said, BFFP as a global movement that consists of more than 3,500 members all over the world, we have crafted these 10 top line priorities that we as a movement think is absolutely necessary and non-negotiable and indispensable to ensure that we have a treaty that we could truly consider to be successful, a treaty that is truly mature enough to help end plastic pollution. So to really quickly kind of go over these things, we think this treaty absolutely must have global measures that reduce plastic production from the source. Plastic chemicals that are hazardous and harmful to human health and biodiversity and the environment must be eliminated through this treaty. Global binding rules with transparency and traceability across the full life cycle of plastics are going to be vital for an effective treaty. I want to stress the word full life cycle here because this is, again, going to be a very contentious topic for many countries. Depending on who you ask, the definition of the full life cycle of plastics will vary. And we have many ambitious countries in the European states, in Africa, and also in the Latin American and the Caribbean states, and also, of course, small island developing states that have consistently said that full life cycle of plastics starts from extraction, from production of the feedstocks of these plastic materials. And so while there's that group going on, there's some countries that think the full life cycle of plastics starts from the production phase when a plastic becomes a product. I believe Siddharth will talk more about these different country positions later on after me. But I just wanted to stress the fact that that's going to be a continuously contentious point. And then we think real action means real money. That basically means that we need these core obligations that are binding to be paired with financial mechanisms that are going to be adequate and sustainable in the long run. So those are some of the top line priorities that we believe are going to be very important. For potential risks, just really quickly, we still have to face a lot of chemical and plastic producing countries who continue to challenge, like I said again, what the full plastics life cycle really means. And because there's so much varying positions and also very polarizing positions, we are expecting to see a lot of countries that might just kind of fold into this sort of pressure and inadvertently compromise a little bit too early than what they need to. We are also seeing countries trying to really kind of strike a deal in Geneva and thereby saying that let's put off a lot of these contentious issues to the Conference of the Parties. But that doesn't necessarily solve the issue because just by kicking the can down the road doesn't mean that the issue is thereby going to be solved. And also, we are seeing countries that are maybe working towards just ending up with something of a framework convention that will be more akin to the UNFCCC's Paris Agreement, which, as you all probably know, has seen a lot of obstacles over the years and continue to see a lot of hurdles that need to get jumped through. And so that's not necessarily a convention that we want to follow in suit. Next slide, please. So then ideal outcome would be having member states agree on these legally binding treaty provisions that can ensure global plastic production, reduction, and phase out plastic production as well through these reduction measures, promote reuse systems over recycling, and also regulate and eliminate hazardous and toxic chemicals. We are going into Geneva hoping that this round of negotiations are going to be as ambitious and constructive as it can be, because there is a potential that this could be the final round of negotiations. However, we are also very clear-eyed about the fact that this doesn't have to be the final round, that should we need more time, because there is a possibility that we could attain a very ambitious treaty, then we shouldn't be so married to the idea of concluding in Geneva, but rather be more focused on buying more time in the hopes of getting an ambitious treaty, whether that means tacking on another session of these negotiations or looking into different sort of pathways. Next slide, please. So that's, I think, it from me. A pathway to a strong global plastics treaty is something that we're all looking forward to. And we hope that you will also join us on this journey and help really kind of amplify what's happening in Geneva and beyond. Thank you. Over to you, Dee.
Thank you so much, Sami. Great. I hope that gives us an overview of where we're at, where we're heading, and what we can expect next. Um, Next up, I would like to invite Siddharth Singh from the Center for Science and Environment. This is a research body based in Delhi. And for years, for months now, with all of these INCs, they have been looking at country positions. Where do they stand on different clauses? Um, and to identify certain key collaboration points and also points of polarization. So let's hear where Asia Pacific countries stand and what high or low ambitions they push for. Over to you, Siddharth.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, Devyani. Let me try and share my screen. Okay, yeah, I think I have it. Can you see my screen, Dee? Okay, great. So, thank you so much, Semi. Thanks, Devyani, first of all, for having me and also for setting the context. Uh, I have very limited time and a lot to share. So what I'll do is basically very briefly about CSE's country position report. So we've been following these discussions since the OEWG meeting that was held in Senegal, in Dakar. And post post the Paris meeting, so basically after INC 2, we have basically looked at most of the in-session submissions. Now, when the first version started, this is something that we did in INC 4. So the first version had some limitations in terms of methodology, but as we've moved ahead, the methodology also has grown robust. So what we basically do is look at in-session submissions that are made by member states and are publicly available on the INC web page or the INC portal. We do understand that, all these meetings, especially the contact groups, are governed by Chatham House rules. But any document that comes out publicly and is attributed to a certain member state, then falls out of the Chatham House rules, and that is how these reports basically are not in violation of Chatham House rules. Now, if uh, coming from what Semi was trying to share, there's a lot of divergences, convergences, and then there are also some articles that are actively being negotiated. Now, there are a few articles, especially the ones that are downstream of the plastic life cycle, that do enjoy consensus. I would refrain from using the word consensus right now, because like we know, nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. So there is a broad agreement, to put it that way, on issues like plastic waste management. Everyone agrees that yes, there is a need to have this article in the text of the treaty. Everyone agrees that there is a need to have an article, dedicated article, on just transition. However, if we actually, we also, what we need to understand, that there's a broad agreement right now. So the moment member states take this article up again, and as we move ahead in the negotiation, either through INCs or through the COPs, there is a very high likelihood that even areas that enjoy broad agreement today might, there might be some nuances that might crop up later, as negotiations basically mature. But for now, we can say with absolute confidence that these are two issues, plastic waste management, just transition, that enjoy a broader agreement. Now, there are other articles which kind of are the meat or the core of the entire treaty. These will decide how much teeth do the the future treaty have, um, whether the nature is voluntary or obligatory, and whether there are enough resources for developing countries, or for countries with some special circumstances, especially the SIDS, to actually implement what the treaty is asking them to, right? And these, fortunately or unfortunately, are currently being actively negotiated. So there's nothing is off the table for now. But if you look at it, I mean, it is the kind of the core of the entire discussions that are happening. So if you look at Article 3, we are talking about global bans, although the article title does not specifically say, because we also need to understand that there is as I was speaking to someone, they said that there's always a potential of an allergic response coming from the other side, from the committee. And that is why people who are put in position like co-chairs and chairs, they uh, what we've learned is they are deliberately trying to avoid using very strong words. Sometimes they also end up using ambiguous words, which could be interpreted differently by different member states, just so that the response from the committee, or the members of the committee who are negotiating, is not as strong and they do not find themselves in a difficult situation. So Article 3 talks about global bans, but it does not say explicitly global bans, but it talks about global bans on plastic products which are problematic in nature. And it also talks about global bans or phase outs of chemicals of concern which are used in specific plastic products. There are several approaches that could be taken. So developing a criteria, developing a list, looking at it from a hazard point of view, looking at it from a risk-based point of view. Those are all issues that are currently being kind of actively deliberated upon. Then we do have Article 5, that is on plastic product design, which basically means that everything and anything that is allowed, that basically is not categorized as problematic plastics and is allowed for circulation, we need to start designing it in a much better way so that there is a non-toxic circular economy that is created overall, so that whatever is circulated, we have collection systems, we have storage systems, channelization and processing, mechanical recycling systems to actually deal with this kind of waste. And then obviously for all of this, we do need financing, right? There is an administrative cost and there is actually an operational cost, all of which is involved. So these are actually actively being negotiated. And if we actually make it through, have some very good language on these articles, I believe that we can actually have a workable treaty. Now, apart from all of this, there's also issues that have seen a very strong pushback. In fact, to the point that some countries, a handful of them though, have said that we do not want to see any language or any article on these issues. And these are trade, health, and supply. Trade already is missing from the chair's text. There is an article on health currently, and there is an article on supply. Health probably might be compromised towards the end of 5.2 because there is a lot of willingness from other countries to compromise on this. Supply is something that has a lot of support from over 100 countries or close to 100 countries. That number is not certain right now, but it does enjoy a lot of support from a lot of countries. But there are a handful who say that, we do not want any language on this, and they're willing to also walk out of all of this if that happens. Now, what we will do over the next 5 minutes is I will take you through the in-session submissions that we've mapped. So if we look at this, there's an Article 8 on plastic waste management. So if you look at this, these are the color coding. So this is the legend on how do you read the map. So if you see a gray, that means that that particular member state did not make any in-session submission. If you see a dark green, that means that particular country has proposed text or inserted or deleted text, which actually raises the ambition. Then there's proposals that lower ambition, which are marked in orange. If a country uh, does not make major changes, accepts the measures as it is, that is seen in light green. And then the ones that are in red are something that that particular member state says that we do not want any article or any language on this particular article. Now, as you can see here, the color basically ranges from orange, which is lowering ambition, to a dark green, which means proposing ambitious additions. But by and large, every member state agrees that there needs to be a dedicated article on plastic waste management. And also, this particular article has seen a lot of submissions, especially if you look at the region that we are basically discussing about. There's India that talks about uh, taking into consideration national circumstances, capabilities. It also talks about financial and technical assistance that is needed for developing countries like India. And they have also deleted a few paragraphs that were related to export of plastic waste, possibly due to its coverage in the Basel Convention. Now, there's also countries like Indonesia who have actually added stronger terminologies like preventing and minimizing and reusing, in addition to what was already there. And they also advocated for a standalone article on EPR, which currently is missing from the chair's text. There's also other countries. In fact, this is one of the articles which sees the highest number of submissions from the Asia Pacific countries. So you see Thailand, you see Cambodia, Malaysia, and all of these have basically agreed more or less to the text that already is basically featuring in the chair's text. Now, this is something that enjoys consensus. So we also need to understand that in these spaces, there's a lot of geopolitics at play, right? So something that enjoys consensus will also encourage other or broad agreement, will also encourage other smaller countries which are dependent through bilateral support on other Western countries, developed countries, would want to come forward and express their support. But something that does not really enjoy that broad agreement, these countries kind of shy away from making those interventions. So for instance, if you look at this Article 3, this talks about global bans on plastic products by developing a criteria and by developing a list. So if you look at some countries, they've said, so let's say for instance, if you look at EU, it says that here is a criteria, and in order for a plastic product to be considered for a global ban, it should meet any of the criteria, any one of the criteria, right? Now, but if you look at, let's say, Kenya, what Kenya has proposed is, okay, we agree to the criteria, but in order for a plastic product to be banned globally, it should meet all the criteria, not any of the criteria. And that's a huge difference, right? So just replacing one word from the existing text really makes a lot of difference. And that is why, I mean, they say the devil is in the details. Now, again, this is something that a lot of countries have been pushing back on. A lot of countries have drawn red lines. So that, for instance, there are countries that are saying that, we can, even going forward, we will only have to consider a risk-based approach to actually look at chemicals and also at plastic products. But then there are other countries that are saying that we should actually take a hazard-based approach, which means that if there is anything hazardous, irrespective of the time of exposure or the limit of quantification or whatever, you should consider banning such products. So different approaches, but if you look at Asia Pacific region per se, it's silent, right? So there is Thailand that has actually advocated for harmonizing a list of chemicals of concern. But if you look at the other players in the region, we do not see a lot of submissions, and that is where I would say that this region actually has a lot of champion countries, definitely like Thailand, but they do not engage with each other as much as the other states in other regions do. So for instance, if you look at plastic products, these are basically for design, plastic product design. Again, it does enjoy a better positioning and better acceptance as far as Article 3 is concerned. So you don't see any oranges here, right? And that is also because the chair's text itself on this article is weak, which means that it would definitely enjoy a lot more support, even from the countries that do not really want an ambitious treaty or are rooting for voluntary measures. They are happy with the chair's text because it already is weak. And then because that acceptance, general acceptance for this article is there, you see submissions coming in from Asia Pacific, where Indonesia kind of chimes in, Philippines chimes in, saying that, hey, we are all support for it, right? But whenever the trend is, whenever there is kind of a pushback, especially from the other member states in the region, that's when Asia Pacific lacks severely in leadership and also in communication. Here you see a clear global north-south divide, where you see that most of the global south countries are saying that, hey, we need a dedicated fund. PCIDs, in fact, and AOSIS have gone to the extent of saying that we need multiple funds. We also need what they're calling it is they're calling it a remediation trust fund, right? So they've also advocated for that. But if you look at countries like Europe, you look at Northern America, they're happy with the chair's text, which basically is talking about mobilizing resources from as many sources as possible, including national, bilateral, multilateral, and does not talk about a dedicated, I would say, dedicated fund. In my opinion, I may be wrong. I can check and get back on this. I've not been very closely following this, but here what we see is a global north-south divide, where the developed countries agree to what's there, and the developing countries are basically asking for much more than what they see on the text. In terms of supply or production, we see a lot of pushback from Western Asia, where countries like Iran, Qatar, to some extent Kazakhstan, right? They are pushing back. And then we also have countries from Asia Pacific, for instance, Indonesia, that explicitly said that, I mean, it did not say that we do not need this article, but it expressed concerns that focusing on reduction without a better substitute might actually not be effective. And instead, focusing on national capacities and focusing on waste management problems might be the way ahead. Here again, Thailand is a champion, where it has actually said that we are advocating for reduction in oversupply. But then you look at the others in the region, not much has been shared on this. Now, I stop here because also we have limited time, but we've in total analyzed close to 22 different articles There are 32 articles, but or maybe more, probably 35, but we've analyzed 22 that had in-session submissions from these countries. Now, what do we need to watch out for is these 5 countries, if not more, right? Because BRICS is someone who has been pushing back really, really very hard. And BRICS plus plus is also kind of chiming in after that was announced. So you see a lot of BRICS plus plus countries that are now recognized, kind of breaking apart from the African group and actually making submissions that are not aligned with the African group of nations per se. But we also see that there is a considerable shift in China's position, where we do see that they are willing to come to the table and talk about a lot of stuff. Although, I mean, South Africa, although has to show its alignment most of the times with African group of nations, but also it does once in a while make some submissions which kind of raise eyebrows. Brazil was kind of a disruptor in some of the few meetings that have happened between INC 5.1 and 5.2. It's coming back very strong. And obviously, we all know the United States of America. There has been a change of government between 5.1 and 5.2. And again, the meetings that have happened in between 5.1 and 5.2 are not looking good as far as US is concerned. As far as India is concerned, I would say India's position has pretty much been, I would say, uh, it has been constant, at least since INC 2, or at least since when we have been following them. They have drawn some red lines, but we do see India becoming silent on specific issues where we are not very sure where their red lines are. We do have an idea, but we do not really know where their red lines currently are. For supply, I mean, India has time and again said that we are not in favor of this, and we want no text on this article. So we want this article removed. So India's position is very clear, and they've not really, like other countries, they've not kind of went back and forth on a lot of issues. And I think they have a lot of clarity on till what extent they can go in terms of compromising, and where do we have to kind of draw that hard line. So that's it from my side. I will stop here. I hope I've not exceeded the time that I had. And back to you, Devyani. I think I have. Sorry.
A little, and that's fine. Thank you so much, Siddharth. This was very interesting. And I know that once the reports are live, we'll be sharing the links with everyone present here, and they can do deep dives into the countries of interest to really see what's going on and what positions they've assumed. Thank you so much for that overview. So, as we've been mentioning this time and time again, and for those of you who've covered this, we know that this is the INC 5.2. Now, there is a dark reason why we've gone into extended sessions to begin with, when this could have been done in 5 sessions. And that is because we've seen several tactics to delay progress and create bottlenecks. So next, I'd like to invite Pinky Chandran, Break Free from Plastics Regional Coordinator for Asia Pacific, to discuss the tactics and other key issues to look out for and how to identify weak commitments from delegations. Over to you, Pinky.
Thank you, Devyani. So, like Devyani mentioned, we are now in our resume session, which is INC 5.2. But just to take you back, in March 2022, at the resumed 5th session of the United Nations Environment Assembly, which was UNIA 5.2, Resolution 514 was adopted by consensus, and I'm using the word consensus, by 175 member states. And it called for a creation of an Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee to develop the treaty to end plastic pollution. So the INC began its meeting on November 28, 2022, with the aim of creating a legally binding instrument by 2024 at the rate of 1 meeting every 6 months. However, the fifth INC meeting in Busan concluded without reaching an agreement. As a result, a follow-up session, that is INC 5.2, is set to take place in Geneva in August 2025. So why was there no conclusion? From its inception, if you look back, the INC process has actually been plagued by questions regarding its decision-making mechanism. And during INC 1 in Uruguay, a delegate actually aptly summarized this challenge. And he said, they said that the challenge amid 2,300 participants, they said, is we have one giant global plastic pollution problem and 1,000 suggestions on how to solve it. A case in point on the disagreements could be also seen at the April negotiating round in Ottawa, which resulted in a nearly illegible draft with about 3,400 disputed sections. Although the chair's final text has reduced this to around 340 contested items, the fundamental disputes that have characterized debates are still present and it's not resolved. So when you unpack consensus, consensual decision making in international law is in what you could say is egalitarian, because the principle or the premise is that every state holds an equal voice in international proceedings and cannot be bound without its consent. But when you're looking at consensus as a whole, consensus could also grant disproportionate power to some nations while undermining the others. Because a common tactics in this negotiation also involves introducing various issues, some unrelated, to create kind of a leverage or like a hostage taking situation. So the central question for us for INC 5.2 is whether we will continue to operate under the principle of nothing is agreed until everything is agreed, using decision making of consensus as a political tool, as opposed to voting, which treats all parties equally. So that's the debate continues. Next slide, please. So what's in the mandate? Sorry. So what's in the mandate? I don't know if video will play. Just give me a minute. So in the mandate, if you go back to the UNIA resolution, it very well recognizes that we need to look at addressing full life cycle of plastics. Further down the resolution, it says, decides that the INC to develop an internationally legally binding instrument based on a comprehensive approach that addresses full life cycle of plastics. So if that is the case, why are people still questioning, is plastic pollution in the mandate, is chemicals of concern in the mandate? So there are all these, is trade in the mandate, is health in the mandate? So there's always this constant question around it. So what is in the mandate is a question. And like what Deep and Semi both mentioned, you have to look at plastic life cycle from a full holistic approach, right from extraction to production to design to the sale to how it is then distributed to the whole waste industry and dumping and burning. Now, taking a step back, the third part of the problem is also the conflict of interest and the industry influence. And if you look at it, you need to question who is in the negotiation room. And INC 3, there were 143 fossil fuel and chemical lobbyists that gained access to these negotiations. In INC 4, there were about 196, and in INC 5, there were 220. So 220, mind you, it's almost a 40% increase, 10 outnumbering the delegates from European Union, the Pacific Islands, and the Latin American countries, as well as outnumbering the Scientist Coalition for an Effective Plastic Treaty more than 2 to 1, and the Indigenous People Caucus by almost 9 to 1. I don't have the numbers right now for waste pickers, but you can see how influential they are. And what is the playbook that they use then? So the playbook that they use is, first is to secure privileged access. So if you look at the image there, they actually gain access by becoming part of the member delegation. So which means the influence in the negotiations is again very high. By manufacturing doubt, we've seen that time and time again. The second image also talks about how they question things. And we all I think most of us are also familiar with that famous 3M case, where they actually knew about the harm that the products caused, but continued with it till there was a whistleblower movement. Then, by sowing disinformation, by providing misleading claims, I think it was in Canada that when people went to INC3, people were like bombarded with a lot of images which says plastic saves lives, and it was all over. There was also flyers distributed to the hotels which talks about the merits of plastic. Then there are industry submissions, and who are making these submissions. If you look at it, it would be like the Chemistry Association making submissions on behalf of the industry, talking about, yes, we agree on this, but this is what we need to look at. By changing words, co-opting terms, it's very easy to actually, like what Siddharth said, the devil is in the detail. Then there is industry pressurizing government delegations. I think there was one meeting which was held at a location which was part of a business coalition. And then there is this whole issue of intimidating independent scientists. So there is a lot of these tactics that they constantly use. Lastly, I think is also the issue of inclusion. Now, any kind of policies per se cannot be crafted in vacuum. And if you look at all the international environment on human rights laws, including our own respective domestic laws, public participation in decision making is enshrined in these. But having said so, when people are assured that there is, there is access to participate, we need to really question how are we being allowed to participate, because we need to have no restrictions in terms of participation. The image. Sorry, Devyani, next slide, please. So the image here, when you're telling that we've prepared the meeting spaces so that observers could participate, but when you land up there is no room. We had to stand in line for a long time to really enter the room. So how are you really looking at, at inclusion, including other voices, not just the industry voice? Next slide, please, Devyani. So one is access to the rooms to be present, and the second is to be able to speak. At INC 5.2, as the plenary was going on, there had to be an intervention where the indigenous community stood up and said, we need to be heard. So if you cannot take different perspectives, how can you even craft a meaningful policy? So then the policy is always going to be lopsided. It's always going to be favoring somebody who has power, who has influence, who has the loudest voice, and who has privilege. So I'll stop here and we can open it up for question and answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Pinky. We have a small segue for now before we start the Q&A section, where we would like to hear from some civil society organizations, the very same that Pinky showed in the comic, that have been excluded from the gatherings on different occasions. I also see a comment in the chat box where someone has flagged that a lot of the sessions are not open to the media. So you feel us. So in this next short session, I'm bringing in two representatives, one from South Asia and one from Southeast Asia. And to each, I would like to ask the question, what are you seeing so far in your region or country? Where do your delegations stand? And what would it take for them to drive an effective treaty? So may I welcome Siddiqa Sultana from Environment and Social Development Organization, or ESDO, in Bangladesh, who can weigh in on South Asia's position.
Thank you, Divani. And hello, everyone. May I audible clearly?
Yes, you are.
Okay.
Thanks, Siddiqa.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your questions. Yeah, it's now time. It's really a very challenging, and it's not difficult, but very challenging time we are passing, all of us. So regarding my question, in South Asia, both Bangladesh and India are vocal about tackling plastic pollution, but have different priorities. So Bangladesh, all pioneer in banning plastic bags, and we all always support a legally binding treaty with strong upstream controls, and especially on production and chemical transparency. And however, capacity limitations and fundings remain key concern of Bangladesh. And Bangladesh also, very keen about they will support, as far I know, the production reduction chemical of concern, and also the dedicated financial mechanism, and always the ban problematic plastic and address the life cycle of plastic pollution, and also the just transition. And finally, it's coming up is a strong reporting mechanism. So this is the position of Bangladesh. We have been striking, and also we are focusing on that. And as far of India, already Siddharth and Pinky, especially the Siddharth already say about this. India also, while acknowledge the problem and leans toward national flexibility and favoring a bottom-up approach, often resisting global production caps or binding targets due to economic and sovereignty concern. To drive an effective treaty, so both countries need greater alignment with progressive regional bloc, and also the capacity building support and assurance of equitable financing mechanism. So India and Bangladesh and other countries also, South Asia, Sri Lanka, also the Nepal, the same, we are facing the same problem, but stand is the India is a big country, so they have some problem or challenges to face overall. So this is the situation in what I think about it. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sidika. I think that's a good overview of what's happening in South Asia. I can't imagine it's possible to integrate all of our different positions. Next up, I'd like to invite Punyathon Jungsman from the Environmental Justice Foundation to tell us what's happening in Southeast Asia and what an effective treaty would look like for those countries.
Thank you, Devayani. So I think Southeast Asia is an interesting region at this moment, because we are sort of a swing region. If we were to apply the idea of the swing state in elections, so we as a region has a wide range of views. So you have countries that are completely against the idea of any kind of production reduction, and then you have countries that are more open, such as Thailand. And I think since the people here are journalists, I think it's good to kind of look at the deeper structural reasons for that. And that is the Global Plastics Treaty at its best, the best kind of treaty that would push for production reduction would inevitably affect the petrochemical industry and the fossil fuel industry, because that would mean that the extension of those industries won't be happening anymore. And Southeast Asia is one of the biggest growing petrochemical kind of region in the world, but different countries are at different levels of development. So Thailand, for example, we've had petchem industry for like 30 years now. So it's almost as if our market has been oversaturated. So it's in many ways we are able to handle reduction, for example. But then a lot of our industry is also moving to countries like Indonesia and Vietnam, and those countries we are seeing much more resistant towards production reduction. So I think it is important to look at that deeper layers of analysis to see exactly why the plastics treaty are facing opposition from some Southeast Asian countries and not from others. And given where we are as a nation, as like politically, movement from the United States with the Trump administration, the natural gas, and all these things that are happening are going to influence the negotiation. It's going to make negotiators more economically inclined So I think it's important as well to start pushing for environmental costs to be included in those calculations when it comes to environmental impact, especially because Southeast Asia is likely to be the receiver of any plastic products or petrochemical industry in a situation where the big producers like US and China are fighting each other in a trade war, for example. So yeah, I think it's important at this point not only to push this stronger countries like Thailand to stand strong and to push other countries to step up, but also to look beyond the INCs and beyond the Global Plastics Treaty and beyond plastic as a product to the fossil fuel and petchem industry. And I do urge journalists to do that in the coming months. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Punyathan. Uh, as you can see, we have these voices from South Asia and Southeast Asia. We will be sharing a spokesperson's list at the end of this via an email as well. And people like Siddhika and Punyathan, among a lot of other experts, will be part of that list. So you can reach out to us if you want more detailed interviews with any of them, others, or the panelists that we have. Thank you so much for this. And there's a lot to unpack here. Understandably, we are crunched for time. So let me call on the panel to take the stage again. Semi, Siddharth, and Pinky. Thank you. Just to set the context for the Q&A, and perhaps because time was short before, I just want to direct one question to each of you. Hopefully, it will also help the journalists direct their questions more specifically at each one of you. For the journalists, you're welcome to start adding your questions to the Q&A tab. Please look below. That will just help us compile all of the questions in one place and direct them to the respective panelists. We may miss a couple of things in the comments, but we are keeping tabs on both. So first up, Semi, what are the potential directions of this treaty? What if countries don't agree on the treaty text at INC 5.2? And what are the other possible scenarios?
Yeah, thank you, Dee. That's a question that we often get asked. And at this current excuse me, at this current juncture, it's a little bit difficult for us to kind of predict the future. And we're generally wary of saying what would need to be done if we cannot conclude the negotiations in Geneva with a treaty, mainly because I think it is important for us to focus on what we need to achieve at Geneva. And we really don't want countries and also observers, including civil society, to start thinking about alternative pathways before we've actually gave it our all in Geneva. However, with that being said, in the event we cannot come to an agreement on a treaty text in Geneva, a slew of different options are in front of us. And that may be anything from, like I said, countries maybe agreeing to having a couple more rounds of these Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee sessions, to countries maybe thinking a little bit more creatively and saying, hey, how about we just get a group of representatives of our different kind of interests or even region. Again, these are very political issues and hurdles that we would have to, of course, jump through and see if we could maybe strike a deal that way. Something, perhaps maybe we should take it to different UN settings, whether that be the UN General Assembly or the next UN Environmental Assembly. But these are, how shall I say this? In theory, it could work, but in order for us to get there, there are so many political hurdles that we would have to jump through that kind of really at this juncture in this current in this current geopolitics that we are experiencing seems to be a very tall order. So I do want to say that there are options, but we're going to have to really be mindful and careful of what are the pathways that will actually get us to a treaty, not necessarily what is the next best thing, mainly because we want to just kind of get ourselves out of this negotiating committee style. So these are things that will probably unfold while we're in Geneva. And I think for journalists, this is something that it'll be good to kind of keep your eyes and ears open. I know that especially when we go into contact groups, your availability into those rooms will be severely restricted, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you could get a little bit creative in terms of grabbing people maybe outside the room before they enter the room, or even just kind of tapping someone on the shoulder and say, hey, can I, just have a chat with you just to see like how things are going, like what's being discussed. And yeah, so I just wanted to maybe leave it at there.
Thank you so much, Semi. I think the civil society organizations also have been pretty creative in how they've accessed these spaces. Having said that, media, it isn't really great that we are being restricted access, but I guess creativity is needed. So let's move on to Siddharth. While Siddharth, you focused quite well during your session on where certain divergences and convergences are, I just want to perhaps focus on that again because it's imperative that Asia Pacific as a region can draw on good examples. So where have you seen other regional blocs or coalitions forming that could be strong examples for Asia Pacific to follow?
So, I mean, Asia is a difficult region, right? Because unlike Africa, they do have kind of a forum called AMCEN where they meet before the INC, and this has been happening for the last few times, and they align themselves, right? We have the EU who has a space to kind of come together, decide what their priorities would be. That is not happening largely for the Asian region because we're so different, right? I mean, if you look at the life cycle of plastics, we have a player at every juncture, right? We have some countries who are like the biggest producers. We have countries who are taking those raw materials like crude oil and then converting them into plastics. And then we also have countries who are smaller islands and who are, discriminately affected by either waste trade itself or by transboundary movement of what becomes marine litter in other countries, right? So I would say Asia has to be the region that is the most concerned about this issue, right? Uh, but unfortunately, we do not have that forum where all of us can come together and decide what our priorities are because they can never be aligned, right? A country in the Western Asia will never understand what the archipelagic state of Indonesia or Malaysia is going through, right? Because culturally and even in terms of economy or what they depend on for their economic growth is very different. So as far as Asia Pacific region is concerned, I would say there is a lot of appetite for leadership to emerge from this region, right? So, for instance, if you look at regions like GRULAC, they might be very similar to what we are in Asia or Asia Pacific, with not as much diversity, but I would say they are very pretty close to where we are. But they have created voluntarily such platforms which are governed by civil society organizations who bring them together, and then they kind of decide on what their priorities are. So there's a lot for Asia Pacific or even largely Asia to learn from the GRULAC region, because that's a region that really, as coming from the global south, we cannot compare ourselves to EU, right? Because they have a different framework altogether. But I mean, GRULAC is pretty much global south, and their issues are also quite similar to what we have in this region, at least, if not all of them, at least a few of them, the most pressing ones. So we do need to learn from regions like RULAC on how do we organize ourselves. And uh, the smaller countries need to also understand that, being the loudest in the room will not lead to anywhere, and you just need to be strong enough to put your point out there, because uh, the UN system does not judge on the basis of whether you are a small country or a big country, right? Your area or population does not matter. If you're a member state, you're a member state, and your voice counts. That is something that is extremely important for countries to understand in this region, in South Asia, in Asia Pacific, that you are a member state, right? Civil society's voices probably do not count until endorsed by a member state, but a member state, however small, that counts. So that leadership has to come from the state.
Thanks, Siddharth. Definite food for thought. And I really hope the media people here can help amplify those voices that we need to clarify any other issues that we may have at this stage, and drawing examples from what works and perhaps what doesn't. I'd like to direct one last question before opening the floor to Pinky. In fact, Pinky is also a journalist till we poached her as regional coordinator. And Pinky, I'd like to ask you what some of the key challenges in plastic pollution reporting are, especially because a lot of journalists have come from, let's say, a climate reporting background into plastic pollution, and why plastics should not be framed merely as a development issue.
Thank you, Devyani. So, not just for journalists, but for all of us, the plastic problem often resembles a kaleidoscope, meaning that no single perspective can illuminate the complete picture. So, with every turn in the kaleidoscope, we think that's the problem. However, I think we need to take a step back and really look at the plastic problem as a tapestry, where every element is interconnected, interlinked, and interdependent. Because we have this fragmented piecemeal approach to the problem, I think all of us sometimes sail in the same boat. So going back, if you look at plastic flows from a holistic perspective, I mean, like what was mentioned in the presentation today, we're really looking at lifestyle perspective. But because there is so much of politicization of waste management, most of our focus end up covering waste and pollution. And what happens then? Oh, there is a black spot here. There's a overflowing landfill there. There is plastic in water bodies. There are these images of seabirds, dolphin, turtles entangled in plastic. Or there is a surgery of cows and elephants where the doctors are removing the plastic from their belly. So these are the things that immediately draw attention to. Or sometimes it could be, oh my god, there is this new solution, there's eco bricks, so that means let's stuff all our multi-layered plastic in this pet bottle, and construct these kind of shelters or houses for people in living in poverty. And then there is this act of glorification, because we're so ingrained to look at the visible aspect that we often in the day-to-day cycle of reporting, most of us fail to look at all the things that are invisible, the invisible, often overlooked aspect, which is production of plastic, because that is tied into fossil fuels and petrochemicals. It has significant impact of climate change. All said and done, fossil fuel based feedstocks still constitute 99% of plastic production. So when you talk about climate change and we talk about plastic, we sometimes look at two as separate, but we need to look at two as connected. And the other thing, building on from Siddharth's point, even though he focused on region coming together, uh, what we don't have, and most journalists also struggle, is access for information. We do not have a recognized global scientific authority. There are a few bodies that exist, especially like the UN Global Partnership on Marine Litter. So we have certain things, but we really don't have a body that comes together as a whole which really talks about this. So, and why is that is because most of us don't even know how to define the plastic problem. So So very often even the reporting gets jarred because the plastic problem is then defined as a waste management problem. Um, and so simply to put it simply, I would say the whole plastic life cycle is political, but it has not been given, it has not been equally politicized. So that is where it is. And of course there is the other shortcoming of not looking at the social cultural dimensions. Now when you say that do not equate it to right to development, I think the word right to development has been co-opted for a long time. And when I say co-opted, it says that, like the example that I shared in what was distributed, what was advertised, that plastic saves lives. I'm not denying some of the things from there, but what I'm trying to say is we are justifying all these environmental and socially inequitable practices that continue to exist because we're using the right to development angle. I was actually also reading the SDGs and plastics, and there was one indicator which said um, marine debris plastic debris floating, which is above some 2.5 centimeter or meters, I forget, but that is the basis of the framing. So we have, if you're really looking at top level, surface level issues and not really looking at the end, which is right to health, right to clean environment, right to human rights, I mean looking at it from a human right approach, what happens to issues like social equity, what happens to issues like education, what happens to issues like human health and biodiversity health. So all these things often get sidelined because we're really talking about, oh, we're going to become an XYZ economy. We're going to be achieving developed status, and it's all because we're dependent on plastics. And in reality, the truth of the matter is nobody is actually looking at cost. What is the cost for cleanup? What is the cost for all these, the whole pollution angle? It's very easy to say, okay, let's agree to sustainable production and consumption. But what is sustainable production and consumption? There is so much misinformation floating around. There's so much of greenwashing happening. There are so many half-baked promises that are happening. So when you're talking about right to development, you just get lost in all of these things that you really then fail to look at it more holistically. I'll stop here, Dee.
Thank you so much, Pinky. And I hope I can remind the media again of this beautiful analogy that Pinky made. Perhaps your articles will be like a kaleidoscope, but try to look at it as a tapestry. And if we can cover the issues more nuanced, and if there is something that this media briefing can do in helping, that would be great. If I can request our civil society organizations to also take the stage, then we can direct a few questions at everyone. Thank you so much, panelists. And we have the panel assembled. Please direct your questions in the Q&A section. For now, there's one that's come in, Punithan, for you in the chat section. I'll just quickly summarize it. It says, they've given a context for Thailand. Is Southeast Asia advocating for financial mechanisms? And would it mean that Southeast Asia will cut plastic reduction only if there are financial mechanisms? You can refer to the question or I can elaborate. It's coming from Hannah Fernandez.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think financial mechanism, because most of Southeast Asian countries are developing countries, we see that there are a lot of concerns about financial mechanism. Thailand has expressed a lot of openness towards like the idea of a kind of hybrid format of financial funding, and we've seen that a lot of countries like Malaysia have expressed viewpoints towards we need a very strong financial help to make sure that to kind of like trade off with stronger measures on the upstream levels. So we do see that similar dynamics with developing countries, especially with countries that will require more funding to actually implement these measures. And I think it is fair to say that if you want certain things to happen in the treaty, and then you have countries like Southeast Asia where we need a lot of help as well, then the financial mechanism has to there. I think it's interesting to also add that maybe we also have to ask if the financial mechanism will also reflect the polluter pays principle. And I think things like the primary plastic pollution fee is something that could also be introduced to help. And maybe just as a final thing, I think that it is important to see where those financial mechanisms are also directed. It is important to have those mechanisms to address plastic waste and legacy waste for sure, but also things like reuse, refill, repair, which is more of an upstream measures requiring much less investment, but also having much bigger results in terms of reduction potential is something that we need to look at from the 3D perspective. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pandithan. Siddhika, there are a few questions that I feel you may be able to partly answer, and I'm sure Pinky and Siddharth will step in. It's India focused, but I think it's a concern across South Asia that, in a way, South Asia is worst affected, I think, affected by plastic pollution. This is a question from Neil Kamal, and I'm combining it with a question from Jayashree Nandi and Janki Dash. So, how is India faring? What are India's red lines? Do you think that they will be willing to accept curbs on production? And I'm sure, like in Bangladesh and other countries in this area as well, Janki mentioned that we are facing a lot of issues in politicking rather than giving space to such stories. So, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we already know, Zaber, that the South Asia is both a significant hotspots for plastic pollution and a center of innovation also. So to address this issue, effectively the region must shift from the isolated nation initiative to coordinated regional action. And also it should be the united approach supported by the enforcement, investment, and inclusivity can establish South Asia as a leader in developing an effective global treaty on plastic waste. That because India and Bangladesh come forwarded. So it's a relatively, we are also leading on that. So India and Bangladesh, the focus, and Nepal and Sri Lanka is a little bit, they are supporting us, but you see in the plastic treaty, they are the major player in the South Asia. So yeah, we can do is a collaboratively, and it should be all issues that come forward to jointly. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Siddhika. Pinky, Siddharth, do you want to weigh in on any of these? What's India's stance, red lines, perhaps?
Siddharth, go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, for India, like I said, the position is quite clear, especially in terms of red lines. They have been very vocal. I mean, in terms of production cuts, they don't want any language. No language on trade or anything that acts or could act as trade barriers, disguised as trade barriers. They also kind of time and again have been asking of evidence for the human health impacts of plastics across the life cycle. Although there are reports from government research agencies themselves in India, we did this webinar on human health last time where we collected some evidence that was from research agencies which are affiliated to the government in India itself. So some red lines, I mean, in a nutshell, it's plastic production, it's trade, and to some extent, I would also say chemicals of concern, which I would say is also, I mean, they cite that Stockholm covers it, but unfortunately, Stockholm is only covering POPs, while POPs may be used for production of plastics. But POPs are not the only class of chemicals that go into production of plastics. So that's something that probably India needs to relook at. In terms of bans, I mean, no action at global level. These are not red lines per se. Red lines are limited to production, no production cuts and trade. These are all areas where active engagement is possible, I would say. In terms of in terms of global action, I would say that's something that India does not want. So it's mostly like nationally driven actions. So national bans, a national voluntary standard for products, blah, blah, blah. Um, in terms of approach to these bans, I think India is open to a criteria or adopting a criteria. But India and there are some other countries are not open to having a list-based approach per se. So that is it. And I mean, from where I see, at least Bangladesh at least looks much more ambitious to me. India is not as ambitious as Bangladesh, but also they do keep bringing in these languages on national circumstances, capabilities, like a lot of other countries also do, even PCIDs. So that's, I should shut up right now. Over to you, Pinky.
No, you've covered most of it. I think the only other possible red line, I think there was a press release issued by the government of India after INC 5, which also talked about a lot of things and said India has already taken a progressive stance, like implemented the ban and has introduced a very robust EPR policy. They've also said um, you cannot deny the usefulness of plastics and things like that. But they also mentioned that in terms of scope, it has to be limited to addressing plastic pollution only, without overlapping it with the mandate of other multilateral requirements. So it comes back to the same thing that I said before. How are we really defining plastic pollution? And if the mandate already is there, then why are we going backward? So that would be a serious red line if we go back to question the scope in reality. I would say that.
Thank you so much, Pinky. Sami, I know you're also busy responding to questions in the chat, but this particular question may be more relevant, or I think you'd be better posed to answer it. It's about African countries. Apparently, at the Nairobi delegations meeting, Nigeria was pressuring African countries to drop production cuts. So what does this mean for Africa in terms of playing the same tune and supporting an ambitious treaty? This is a question from Bernard Olgambo.
Thanks, Dee. Yeah, so this is actually, I wouldn't say this is particularly a unique situation for the African region. This is something that many other regions, many other UN regions are also experiencing something similar. We clearly have what we call ambitious countries who have taken a public stance on supporting production reduction measures, and we have been hearing how they are being bullied by their fellow countries within their same regions, or from other countries where they have very close, like, trade relationships or other bilateral relationships on other matters. Really kind of being bullied for taking a very ambitious position when it comes to plastic reduction. This is a concern, but this isn't something new. This is something that often happens in a lot of multilateral environmental agreement negotiations. And this is something that we really need to kind of come together as a global community to say, the onus is on the countries that are bullying other countries. The onus is on the countries that are saying, we need to forego these sort of ambitious positions, and that, kind of creating this narrative that they are, by they, I mean the ones who are ambitious are the ones that are problematic. That is not the case. The ones who are actively advocating for the elimination of production reduction measures, they're the ones that are the problems. They're the ones who are the bullies. They're the ones who are being the obstacles for us to really to get and obtain a very ambitious treaty that could truly end plastic pollution. So I think as journalists and as a global community together, including civil society, we really need to kind of put the onus back on the people who are saying that, the people who are standing up for ambition, people who are actually advocating for production reduction are the problem, and say that that is not the case, that they are the ones that are truly kind of hampering this process in not in a good faith manner, and that this is problematic. So yeah, and this is also a reminder for us to continue to congratulate and to really underscore and acknowledge the ambition and the kind of steadfast commitment that a lot of the ambitious countries in the African region, in the Latin American and the Caribbean region, and in the European region to feel like they do have the support, that they are being recognized for holding their ground. And I think that's something that we could probably also use the help from journalists to really kind of commend them for the efforts that they are really doing to not budge.
Thank you so much. While I have you, there was the question you were trying to respond to. I think it would be great to have the answer live. The question from Jacob Koshi from The Hindu saying, would it be reasonable to suppose that we're starting 5.2 from a blank slate? I can feel the pain, Jacob. And yeah, are we building on nothing or something?
Yeah, I was actually in the midst of replying to Jacob's question and happy to take it live. So not really, Jacob, to be honest with you, because while we came out of INC 5.1 without an agreed treaty text, and certainly there were a lot of coverage that basically kind of put it under I would say, a relatively false light, calling it INC 5.1 a failure. But in the event, actually, there was nothing that actually failed. Sure, we didn't get an agreed treaty text, but one of the truly momentous outcomes of INC 5.1 is the fact that we were able to realize who the true champion countries are that support production reduction, that support the regulation of chemicals, plastic chemicals, countries that truly demand a dedicated financial mechanism that will help achieve obligations of the treaty. So being able to realize and actually pinpoint who these countries are, who these countries actually took that sort of public stance in support of these very key treaty elements was a huge success coming out of INC 5.1. And surely, like many of us said during this webinar, nothing is agreed as of yet on the chair's text. Nothing has been sort of put aside because we've deliberated over and over and everyone is in agreement. Sure, that may not be the case. But because of the realization of who these champion countries are, we are now able to build off of that political momentum and can kind of decipher what are some of these treaty elements that are truly core elements to a successful treaty that we could actually hope for. And so yeah, I wouldn't call it a complete starting from square one.
That's heartening to hear. Thank you so much. Participants, I'm very mindful that we are at time. We just have one last question. Can I just ask for your patience for 5 minutes more? We'll wrap up with by pointing you to resources and how to cover the negotiations both on ground or remotely. The last question from Bernard Ogembo. Pinky, if you'd like to take a look at it, how would they deal with China? How would you accommodate the country? Do we even know if China is part of the like-minded group or not? I think just by and large, the question is about China's position, perhaps. Siddharth, if there's something interesting you've seen, you can also weigh in. Thanks.
I think Siddharth already mentioned about China at least willing to come to the table. So maybe Siddharth, if you could add on to that, that would be useful.
Yeah, so just to respond to that, I think China, see, I mean, it may be too early to say this, but there are signs that China is kind of willing to come to the table, which is a very positive sign, I would say, right? If you go back to meetings like INC 1 and INC 2, China was very different, right? And towards the end, they do understand that there is a need for flexibility. They do understand what their red lines are, and they are engaging in a lot of bilaterals as well as multilateral engagements, which I think is a very good sign, and it points to the fact that they really want a treaty that is workable, right? And they do understand that there is value in it, even for a country like China. So I think it's a good development to have. To what extent we can influence is something that at this point of time it's very difficult to kind of say, and probably people who are working very closely with the Chinese government might be in better position to kind of comment on that. But we are seeing that development on China's part. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And that's a wrap, I think, for this media briefing. Thank you so much, panelists. And I know that there are a lot of questions that may come. Media people, if you would like in-depth interviews with any of the panelists here, our spokespeople, and we'll be sharing a spokesperson's list, or you can scan this code here for access to the spokesperson's list. As next steps, we will also be sharing resources. We do a daily recap of the INCs. We'll be sharing a link of how you can sign up for the recaps. And the recaps will start on day off, which is 4th August. We also have a global press kit, which is available, which can help you with your coverage. We'll be sending it as part of the press release as soon as we can. This week, civil society organizations in different countries are mobilizing to call on their government leaders to support a strong and effective treaty, kind of like what we're trying to do here. Our press release will also have details of that, so your help in amplifying that message would be great. And lastly, we'll be uploading the recording to YouTube and sharing the press release with all of these resources within the week. Thank you so much for your participation, your questions, and please feel free to reach out to either Aya and me. We'll be in touch and we can help you facilitate stories for more detailed investigations in this region. Thank you, panelists, and thank you, participants. Sorry, last up, the country position papers will be released on 29th. There isn't an embargoed version. Siddharth has shared the link to the country position papers. Okay. Thank you so much. Okay. It's live already, and we'll share it in the press release as soon as we can. Thanks.